In the heart of Lyon's Presqu'île district, the Basilica of Saint-Martin-d'Ainay. To construct its 11th century facade, limestone blocks removed from Roman edifices were used, perhaps even from the theater. Inside, beneath the dome, stand 4 monumental granite columns of about 1 meter in diameter. These were originally 9 meters tall and weighed 10 tons each.
The first remarkable thing is that the stone used for these columns wasn't local. They're made of an extremely dense granite, typical of the quarries in the Aswan region of Egypt.
How did these 2 monolithic columns reach Lyon and finally end up in this church? All we know is that the Roman builders imported them.
The use of monolithic blocks is very typical of Roman architecture in that every task was a genuine challenge. Extremely heavy and compact monumental materials were preferred so as to underline the remarkable nature of the architecture.
According to tradition, these columns came from one of the most important Roman edifices in Lyon. Situated at the foot of the Croix-Rousse hill was a gigantic amphitheater capable of seating 20,000 spectators. This huge ancient stadium backed onto the sanctuary of the 3 Gauls, a monument implanted by Augustus to symbolize Gallic submission to the empire.
It was a sanctuary dedicated to the imperial cult for all the people of the 3 Gauls. It ensured a permanent link to Rome, and it was one of Augustus's most brilliant ideas.
We don't know the exact location of the sanctuary, but we do know it contained a huge altar dedicated to Rome and its emperor. An altar most certainly flanked by 2 monumental columns. And all around, 60 statues representing the 60 Gallic tribes.
Delegates would come every year, in August, the month named after the emperor, to swear an oath of allegiance, recognition, and affiliation, so total adhesion to the imperial ideology.
Every year, the delegates of the 60 Gallic tribes elected from among them, and for the coming year, a high priest of Rome and Augustus. One of them was a certain Gus Julius Rufus. Early in the 1st century, he oversaw the construction of the city's most colossal Roman structure.
Gus Julius Rufus was one of the highest-ranking delegates of the Gallic aristocrats, who, alongside the Romans, took part in taking Gaul further and further towards a form of Romanity.
In the late 1950s, early 1960s, archaeologist Amable Audin discovered a trace of this monumental structure. They were the ruins of the Amphitheater of the 3 Gauls, a Lyon Colosseum with its arena financed by the Gallic high priest. Oval-shaped, it was constructed in 19 AD. At first, 81 meters long by 60 meters wide, it was enlarged during the 2nd century, increasing its capacity to 20,000, almost as many as those in Arles and Nîmes. It rested partially on the hill and partially on a hollow structure with Roman concrete vaults, a showcase that served as a gathering place for the delegates from the 60 tribes.
They would make decisions of general interest. They would present petitions to the governor, who would pass them on to the emperor. It was also a time for executions and for gladiatorial fights.
Gladiator fights, wild animals, and executions. Yet another expression of Rome's power, but also a way of encouraging the total adhesion of the vanquished Gauls to the culture of their victors.
I'm in the chapel dedicated to Nemesis, a goddess who was highly respected by the gladiators. What's more, it was the only room with direct access to the arena. So every gladiator had to come through here, stop to reflect a while before going out into the arena to face combat.
To watch the fights and take part in the discussions of the Council of the Three Gauls, the delegates from the 60 Gallic tribes had reserved seats. These limestone blocks, weighing up to 1 ton, were moved from place to place with state-of-the-art hoisting equipment, such as the tread-wheel crane, a machine which owed everything to a Roman invention that's still used today, the pulley.
The most important Roman invention for construction was the block and tackle, a system of pulleys which enabled them to lift heavier and heavier weights with less and less labor, thus gaining in efficiency and profitability.
Found during the archaeological digs, the blocks were returned to their rightful places in the amphitheater during restoration work.
On the first part of this block are the 3 letters ARV, standing for the Arvini, present-day Auvergne. Then there's BITC, standing for the Bitterigis Cubi, present-day Bourges, and there are vertical lines that show the separation between seats. 3 delegates of the Bitterigis here, and 1 from the Arvini here, almost certainly with his colleagues to our left.
It was due to these discussions, which the walls of this amphitheater undoubtedly overheard, that in 48 AD, the Emperor Claudius, who was born in Lyon, spoke out for the Gallic elite to be incorporated into the Roman Senate. A historic speech given in Rome and reproduced on these bronze tablets discovered at the foot of the Quahus Hill.
After Claudius became emperor, certain Gallic nobles submitted a petition demanding that they have the full rights of Roman citizens. What's remarkable about this is that an emperor in the 1st century AD should stand up for the integration of foreigners.
Like the Roman colony of Lugdunum, the Lyon amphitheater would forever change the face of the Gauls. Gauls for whom Lugdunum had been presented as a showcase for a new Romanity during the 1st and 2nd centuries AD. Other than its theater, it had all the attributes of a modern Roman city. Its Odeon, dedicated to the lyrical arts, built in the late 1st century. Its circus for chariot races, the remains of which have never been discovered, but whose existence is confirmed in records. And its numerous mosaics, which testify to a wealthy city through trade.
Lyon was undoubtedly one of the biggest cities in the empire. We know this from ancient texts, but also from the remains still present in Lyon today. It was probably one of the 10 largest cities in the entire Roman Empire.
You must imagine lots of merchandise, especially foodstuffs, being shipped up the Rhone Valley to Lyon, where it was then sold. This made Lyon a commercial hub. It was a very active cosmopolitan city which drew a lot of foreigners.
A number of monuments of this cosmopolitan city remain on the surface, but also magnificent structures underground. Beneath the slopes of Quahus Hill, an underground maze of shafts and galleries as long as the Champs-Élysées, the Fishbones, a name which this feat of engineering owes to its shape, with 1 main gallery and 32 secondary galleries placed like bones growing out of a backbone.
The Fishbones are inside an 80-meter slope and measure a total of 2 kilometers long. There are 400 meters of shafts. This engineering work is the only one of its kind known in the world.
An underground superstructure unique in the Roman world. It was discovered in its entirety in the 1960s during the digging of the Quahus Tunnel. It has since fueled all kinds of fantasies. The hiding place for the treasure of the Templars, a secret military defense system. Today, it's used to drain rainwater from the hill. In 2008, using carbon-14 dating, archaeologists became certain that it was constructed by the Romans sometime in the early 1st century AD.
We're now pretty much sure that it's a Roman structure, built in several phases, but with the first phase quite early, probably during the reign of Augustus. It must have been extremely expensive and difficult to construct, and it remains a complete enigma to us today.
It was thanks to this stonework shaft that the network was first discovered in 1959.
The shaft measures 2 by 2 meters and is 25 meters long, half the length of an Olympic swimming pool.
There are a total of 16 shafts like this one in the Fishbones. They were used to remove the rubble produced by the digging of the 2 kilometers of galleries.
The network was linked to the surface. Were the shafts solely for the evacuation of rubble from the digging? That seems unlikely. There was clearly a need for communication between the surface and the underground network, but why? Then there's the question of its connection to the sanctuary of the 3 Gauls. Was this just a coincidence? And if they were connected, why?
To construct the network, laborers started by digging the galleries, which they then reinforced with semicircular vaults. The galleries were then laid with mortar mixed with rubble stone. It seems as if they were intended as some kind of storage space, like a gigantic underground Fort Knox of antiquity.
They used the typical Roman vaulting system for these underground galleries, which is somewhat puzzling because the vaults are absolutely perfect and employ the same system as for the theatre and other edifices in the city.
Inside these vaulted galleries, another detail catches the eye: the particularly thick and solid floors.
It's what's known as a hedgehog subbase, essentially made up of rubble, bits of granite, and gneiss, which were used a lot in Roman construction in Lyon. And this subbase is covered in a layer of concrete. The total thickness of the subbase and concrete apron is about 80 centimeters. That may have been to make the structure more solid, but also perhaps for the storage of particularly heavy materials or objects.
Heavy materials like those used in the Lyon mint, the only place to strike coins in the empire outside of Rome.
A mint striking gold and silver coins, like in Rome, to pay the Roman soldiers stationed in Gaul and Germania.
To protect this mint, Lyon was sent an elite force of 500 men, an urban cohort.
Lyon's importance is very much emphasized by the presence of an urban cohort, in other words, a garrison, to protect the city. And it's also the only provincial city, apart from Carthage, which has any urban cohorts.
Were the Fishbones used to protect the stock of coins struck in the Lyon mint? The only certainty is that they were connected to the Rhone River, via which the heaviest materials were brought in and out of Lugdunum.
The fact that the Fishbones, clearly some kind of storerooms, are so deep down remains something of a mystery. But because it's difficult to reach such a depth, there was obviously some reason behind it.
While struggling to find the reason behind the Fishbones, underground and protected, they provide one of the most moving relics of Roman Lyon. These fingerprints left by a child, possibly visiting the works, but also this graffiti left in the fresh mortar.
Here we have one of the clearest pieces of graffiti in the network, Bituius Iorosari Filius. It was scratched into the mortar just after it was laid. Pituius was certainly the name of one of the laborers who constructed this gallery.
How many men did it take to build this gigantic underground structure, unique in the Roman world? History cannot tell us, but it does testify to the flourishing life of the former capital of the Gauls. During the 1st century AD, the population of Lugdunum continued to rise. Historians estimate that it was around 30,000 inhabitants. Aristocrats, citizens, plebes, freedmen, slaves, their water needs were colossal.
Why did they need so much water? Notably for the public baths and fountains, but especially the baths, which used vast amounts of water.
To meet Lyon's needs, Roman engineers constructed a network of 4 aqueducts with a combined length of 220 kilometers between the reign of Augustus and that of Hadrian in the early 2nd century. Their total flow rate was 40,000 cubic meters a day, 20 times more than the aqueduct of Lutetia, today's Paris.
The water supply was the second largest after Rome, and its aqueducts were among the longest in the Roman world.
So it's incredible that the Romans had a better water supply in Lyon than Lyon itself had until the 19th century.
How were the Roman engineers able to achieve such a technological feat? And with what means did they get around the numerous obstacles in their way? "40 kilometers southwest of Lyon is a tunnel dug by the Romans to allow the aqueduct to cross a rocky outcrop.
These are marks left by Roman pickaxes. There are also places where they were able to hang their oil lamps. This place is filled with life and is a very moving testimony to the laborers who dug the tunnel during the Roman period.
Inside the tunnel, the water channel is pretty much intact. The tunnel through which the aqueduct runs was solidified with a vault of Roman concrete.
They proceeded section by section. They used wooden centering over a length of 2 to 3 meters, then moved it further on, once the piles and the vaulting of that section were completed.
A Roman invention, opus signinum, a coating of mortar mixed with broken tiles and pottery, made the channel completely watertight.
One of the main characteristics of opus signinum is the presence of broken pottery, ground down to dust or slightly larger fragments. It was this pottery which made the mortar watertight, allowing water to flow through the channel with no loss. The great thing was this material was readily available everywhere, and it could be made of broken tiles, bricks, or pottery.
Water flowed along this channel thanks to gravity by following the most constant downward gradient possible of about 1 meter per kilometer.
Well, the idea is that the aqueduct starts somewhere that's higher than where it finishes. So the trick was to actually create a channel that had a constant gradient of that sort all the way from the source of the aqueduct to the finishing point.
To follow the most constant gradient possible, Roman engineers carried out extensive work on the ground. Firstly, in locating water sources, then tracing the best route for the aqueduct. Their goal, to limit the amount of heavy labor required.
The surveyors looked for 2 things. 1, the shape of the terrain and how to obtain the longest possible straight lines. And 2, the parts of the route where they might need to build a bridge.
But how were they able to maintain this constant downward gradient? The Roman surveyors, who were often called soldiers, used an ingenious tool called the chorobates. It acted like a modern-day spirit level, with a beam, 2 rods, and 2 plumb lines.
With the chorobates, they could calculate the height difference between 2 distant points and thus establish the most suitable gradient for the aqueduct.
It was a simple tool, but handling it took a lot of skill on the part of the surveyors. And after that, they could dig the foundations and start erecting the edifices.
Skill on the part of the surveyors, but also of the builders, to which these bridges to cross rivers and valleys and maintain the sacrosanct constant gradient bear witness. And always with the same principle, the arch, to save on materials. Works constructed with Roman concrete, but with meticulous cross-link cladding, just like in Rome.
The construction of an aqueduct in a Roman city was a symbol of civilization. Don't forget that Lyon was the capital of a Roman province, and therefore considered a very important city, and that justified the presence of such a vast, sophisticated water supply system.
On the piles of these arches, one detail catches the eye. These layers of bricks that run through them. What was their purpose?
They marked a first full level during the construction. Then the builders laid the casing on top and placed the cladding on the outside before pouring in the Roman cement made of mortar and rubble stone.
But for the water to reach Lyon, the biggest challenge lay elsewhere. In the region's rugged terrain, with numerous deep valleys, including those immediately surrounding the city, higher even than Fourvière Hill.
You would have to pile up 15 ponts de gare to actually fill the gap represented by the valley. So clearly a bridge was out of the question.
To cross these deep valleys, the Roman engineers used an ingenious system based on that of communicating vessels, the siphon. Key to this system was a flush cistern which sent water under pressure into lead pipes.
This is the aqueduct channel where the free-flowing water arrived. It accumulated here, in this tank, and then it was released, under the built-up pressure, into the lead pipes.
Now, why lead pipes? Because nothing else could hold the pressure. And also, not one lead pipe, but a number of lead pipes to divide the pressure so that they didn't all burst when they got to the bottom.
Once under pressure in the lead pipes, the water crossed the valley and its momentum enabled it to climb up the other side to another slightly lower tank. This second tank regulated the flow before the water was released into the channel and onto its final destination.
I have to say, out of pride for Lyon, we actually have a total of 9 siphons at Lyon. And in the whole Roman world, there are only about 30. So we have 1/3 of all the siphons in the Roman world are at Lyon. So a lot of people know Lyon as the capital of the Gauls, but we call it the capital of the siphons.
Capital of the siphons. One figure testifies to that: 10,000 tons, the quantity of lead used for their pipes. That's almost the weight of the Eiffel Tower. This figure alone embodies the height of Lugdunum in the 2nd century, before a terrible event marked the beginning of its decline. (197 AD). Battle raged at the gates of Lyon. a battle that opposed two claimants to the title of Emperor of Rome.
The Battle of 197 was the climax of a civil war in which Lyon sided with the eventual loser.
Lugdunum, which had sided with the vanquished, was ransacked. Archaeologists have found traces of this ferocious battle hidden in the soil of Lyon. These are very well preserved arrowheads and a pilum, now kept at the Center of Restoration and Archaeological Studies in Vienne.
This is a fine example of a pilum. Why is the metal shank so long? Because on impact with the target, it would break, making it unusable for the enemy. So it's very rare to find one intact. We usually just find small parts of them, so this is a very rare find.
Among the traces of the battle in the Lyon soil were these hastily made arrowheads.
This is the type of weapon made during a siege when you needed to make a lot of them very fast to keep the invading army at bay. It's consistent with the siege and capture of the city in 197. It's an interesting find because it confirms the violent nature of the events that took place at the gates of Lyon and then inside the city.
This decisive battle marked the beginning of a transformation for Lyon, with the gradual abandoning of Fourvière Hill for the banks of the Saône and the Presqu'île district.
The abandonment was gradual but complete by the end of the 4th century. And the hill then saw the development of religious communities.
The urban population decreased, the city shrank further and further into the reduced city walls, and these reduced walls were in what is now the Presqu'île district.
During the Middle Ages, the former capital of the Gauls was methodically dismantled, then forgotten. But the remains of its edifices, constructed between the late 1st century BC and the 2nd century AD, still testify to its ancient glory. Like its theater, which now hosts the festival Les Nuits de Fourvière, its Odeon, its 20,000 capacity amphitheater, its aqueducts, and their ingenious siphons, and the Fishbones, that mysterious underground superstructure and reminder that Lugdunum is yet to reveal all its secrets.